Welcome to the October 17th Grants Pass City Council workshop, and we have 4 councilors in the room here, and Valerie Lovelace is online, so that'll make our quorum. We'll see what happens to the other guys. Let's get started on downtown plan.
All right, good morning. So we have titled this Downtown Public Infrastructure Plan to hopefully add just a little clarity. We're not talking today about a downtown land use plan or a downtown zoning plan, or maybe what you have seen in a lot of other communities where they have a more comprehensive downtown plan that addresses land use, residential, commercial, parking, everything in a single plan. That's what you would see traditionally. We actually do have one from the late 1980s that was never adopted, but we have reference from time to time, but as you can imagine is quite out of date and is not very helpful. So we don't use it that much, primarily because it wasn't ever adopted. But the slide deck today is focused really on sort of the public infrastructure piece, which I think is largely what you heard from them a couple of weeks ago on the Central Business District Vitalization Task Force. So there's 2 other pieces here. Really wanted to zero in on the downtown tree planting. That seemed to be one of the activities that was presented by Ward Warren a couple of weeks ago that the council felt that we might be ripe for, and was some low-hanging fruit to get some movement on. So we've got some numbers for you today on that. And then potential next steps for a downtown public infrastructure plan to maybe kind of piece it all together. Right now it's a little fragmented, with sort of just these individual pieces that are in there. And then those are the 2 council goals that we felt that this primarily maintained, to encouraging economic opportunity and maintaining, operating, expanding our infrastructure to meet community need. So as you know, October 3rd, a couple of weeks ago, you received the report from the CBDV task force. They had some recommendations for redevelopment projects, et cetera, and the main projects that were addressed in that report are there in orange: the terrain landscape downtown plan, downtown lighting, parking needs and availability, G Street reconfiguration, and then the urban renewal area funding and partnerships. They did also include 9 other recommendations and observations, including things like the Welcome Center and downtown banners, street furniture, parklets, alleyways, and then large vehicle and RV parking were also in their report. So as I noted, a couple of councilors wanted to move forward on the downtown tree element of the terrain architect plan. We do have some dedicated funding for trees that is in the budget, and then some preliminary scoping work has been done on that as well. And you also have the Urban Tree Advisory Committee that completed some preliminary site identification work. So here's the map that was included in the terrain architecture plan. You've seen this a couple of different times now. The green areas, it basically goes from D Street down to J Street, and then from about 3rd over to 8th. So all of these green areas are identified in that plan as opportunities for new street tree plantings in the downtown core. There's a couple of blue areas. Those are existing planters with missing trees. And then there is an existing cutout. There's also a hazard tree up here. So that's some of the work that's been done to date in terms of site-specific identification. So in thinking about that, we as staff thought there's really three main planting tree scenarios to consider. So we have some areas that only have existing sidewalks. There's no tree well. So that would essentially mean going in and you know, cutting the sidewalk and creating the well and a place for a street tree. We also have some with an existing tree well, but no metal grate. There's common to, you know, to have the protecting metal grates if you're talking about downtown sidewalk street trees to help in the long term protect them. There's lots of different designs, you know, they come with expandable holes so that as the tree gets larger, it doesn't girdle it and things like that. You know, so there's different grates to, but so we did look at the metal grates. You'll see that that's the most expensive piece of the project, as you might imagine, since they need to be strong enough to withstand, you know, bicycles and skateboards and lots of whatever. So that's really the second one. And then the third one, these are areas, there is an existing tree well and existing metal tree grate that would need, you know, new tree. So we did some preliminary cost estimating on this, and thanks to Wade Elliott for this work. This does assume the removal of a 10-foot by 10-foot section of sidewalk that would install a 4-foot by 4-foot tree well. Which is pretty standard. So this is the most expensive option, a sidewalk with no tree well. So that's about $5,000 for one. For a new tree installed in an existing well where there is not a grate, that's a little less money, $4,175. And you'll see on each of these, it assumes that it's about $3,000 for a 4x4 metal grate. So they're pretty spendy. The other items on these, you know, putting in some amended soils to ensure that well has got some good conditions for these trees to survive and do well in. They also assume a 2-inch diameter tree and water bags. And then the last one is there's a tree well with a grate, and this is basically going in, amending the soil, doing some excavation, putting a new tree in there. That's estimated around $1,100. So since we just got this direction October 3rd, we have done some preliminary work, but we didn't really have enough to bring to you, you know, each specific site and exactly what would be needed for each one. So at this point, what we're bringing to you is sort of these higher level tree estimates for those different types of approaches. You know, of course, you do have the options with any of these. We can go with, you know, there's plastic options for grates, there's composite options. They are much less expensive in terms of the upfront cost, but, you know, less durable. Some jurisdictions have chosen to plant trees without any grate, just putting the mulch and the topping down. You know, it's certainly an option, generally not recommended for, you know, urban downtown settings. So moving on to some of the other downtown plan elements, since the October 3rd workshop, there's a little bit of work that's gone on some of these. We talked about the lighting. That does have an assigned LB project number 6392, and the FY23 budget identifies G Street between 6th and 3rd, 5th Street between G and H Street between 5th and 6th. So you talked on October 3rd about maybe expanding and tweaking that lighting program a little bit to maybe have some cross street lighting, to maybe expand some of the areas, some of the blocks a little bit. We could certainly, redefine that scope and bring back some revised costs for you on the lighting. At this point, Thornton Engineering has not done any more work since that original plan that you saw and that the Central Business District Task Force saw, that shows, just those kind of high-level areas. There would need to be a little bit more engineering work to determine, electrical supply and where exactly we would connect those to poles and buildings. Street light banners. We've done some initial cost estimating on this. Some general design ideas were presented to the Historical Building and Sites Commission in August. They've had some, high-level discussions about that. We have looked at some blocks. We're pretty confident that those could be connected to most of the poles that we have there, and that could be either paired with the flower baskets or come up with another hanger design if they're put on the street side. So anyway, we can kind of wrap up that recommendation with HBSC here fairly soon and be able to bring the council back something more specific on that. The art walk, that was also mentioned as part of the downtown planning. One of the activities, that area east of the Grasshopper lot next to the post office. No planning work has really been completed on that to date. The G Street reconfiguration, you received the community survey input. You also received the recommendation from the Central Business Task Force. So we're awaiting council direction decision on that. That recommendation that you saw last week was to not proceed with that project. The Owlot Plaza, that's another element that was included in the terrain architecture plan. So there is, again, very sort of high-level design thoughts about that. In order to move that one forward, we would just need, we need to identify funding, and we need to identify, a more specific scope so that we can give engineers and an architect, more specific scoping and guidance on what that would look like. And then downtown parking, the Lancaster Mobley study had a detailed study on that in 2018. And then, of course, your downtown parking task force met numerous times in 2019, 2020, and presented those recommendations. But again, in terms of identifying specific lots for new surface parking, doing work on any potential costs for structured parking, none of that analysis has been done. So we would basically, in order to bring you, again, piecing all of that together, hearing today, we'll obviously listen to your direction, and sort of, if you want to set priorities, we can take those and either bring you back some specific plans, some specific budget numbers, or piece it all into a little bit more of a singular plan. But again, that's just up to your discussion today, obviously. Here's the cost implication slide. We've got street trees. That really depends on which ones are selected. We got that range there, $1,175 to $5,000 per tree. LB 5067 has a FY23 budget of $111,313, and then the lighting also depends on that scoping. We do have the LB 6392 that has $350,000. That also assumed some work on a plaza. So those are your alternatives at the bottom, and that's what we have from staff.
Thanks, Brad. Looks like Rob has a question.
On the tree grates, you mentioned they have to be able to stand bicycles or skateboards or whatever. Obvious to me, like, one of the number one things they do is prevent sprained ankles and broken legs and stuff. But the question I have is, the first thing I think of is, occasionally when a car drives up on the curb or whatever, it has to be able to withstand the weight of a car as well. So I'm wondering about the composite grates, like how strong are they compared to the steel grate? And could they withstand that kind of punishment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the bearing weight off the top of my head. I do know that they're not going to hold as much. But you can get them different thicknesses. I mean, you get a pretty thick composite grate, it's going to be able to withstand, quite a bit of weight there. But it's not as much, but I don't have that exact comparison weight figure.
It's like $2,200 difference, right, per grate?
Yep.
Yeah, I guess we need to know that.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. Following up on Rob's question, the composite grates, do we know the estimated life on those? I would assume they're less than metal, obviously, but do we have any idea if they're a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year, or do we not know that quite yet?
Do you have any information on that, Jason?
I don't, we could definitely look into that. I would guesstimate it's going to be greater than 10 years, but I think what you'll find is they'll start to warp. And once they start to warp, we'll want to be considering replacement because it'll curl up and give people something to trip on.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know, but is there a scenario where after the useful life of the grate, maybe the tree would be mature enough to where it wouldn't need a grate anymore after that point?
I can tell you from prior experience in Boise that is true. You know, what you start to see happening is more the damage happening on the trunk, which of course the grate's not going to prevent. So that's where you probably tend to see more of the damage is, actually on the trunk. So, but yeah, you're right. Once it hits that maturity point, some of the compaction, of the soils on top of it is still going to probably reduce the life a little bit. But, which again is something that a grate would help to prevent the soil compaction on top of the roots. But yeah, it would be less important. It generally is seen as pretty critical at the first 5 years or so.
Okay, thanks.
Rick, then Valerie?
Thank you. Brian asked my question.
Okay, Valerie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was just the same thing going back to the grate. Does it prevent the sidewalks from buckling? Does either of the devices? Because that's what I've seen, the biggest damage with trees is not even so much on top of the grate, but does the heavy grate prevent the damage from the roots on sidewalks?
No, I wouldn't say that would be a correlation. The grates are just kind of at that top level of the soil between, flush with the sidewalk, and then they're just going to be around the well. So the root activity is going to be the root activity, regardless.
Does that depend upon the tree that you plant? I mean, I just realized in a lot of older places where you're walking, there's a lot of sidewalk damage. And I'm just trying to think of, have they figured out which trees do less of that? Does that have to do with the tree that's planted?
Exactly, Counselor. It really depends on the class of tree. And there's a lot of data on that in terms of what trees make for the best urban trees for multiple reasons, in terms of fruit falling, the root growth. So have we had some trees planted in sidewalks that shouldn't have been? Probably. But in terms of moving ahead, I don't think it's a matter of knowing what the most appropriate tree to plant is. It's probably just, making sure that gets looked at and is tracked better.
And are there areas of that downtown area that have more traffic than others? I'm just trying to look at, as I'm sure everybody is looking at $5,000 per tree. That's a pretty good hefty price. So I'm just kind of trying to think around. I definitely think in the downtown most traveled area, there's no doubt that the steel grate would be the best, but I don't know how heavily traveled all of those areas are. So I'm just throwing that out there as a question. Do we know?
Well, are you referring to pedestrian traffic or are you referring to vehicle?
Yes. Yes, pedestrian.
Pedestrian? Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not aware that we have any good information on that. That would probably be a pretty subjective call depending on which time of year and which block. But, certainly we have good ideas just from observation about G Street, H Street, 6th and 7th, but some of the other side ones, I don't think we really have good numbers on pedestrian activity. On vehicular activity, we do. We have a little better idea on that.
Okay.
DJ?
Sure. I think as everybody said, it's pretty expensive. I'd like to see that cost go down. It would seem that planting trees in those high traffic areas with a composite, you could buy 6 of those for the price of 1. Is it possible to, going on what Brian's train of thought was, if a tree is more mature, theoretically, it doesn't necessarily need a grate. We could plant more mature trees, I would presume. Now, the bigger the tree, the more expensive it's going to be. But if we could plant mature trees in those high traffic areas and get away from the grates, that would seem to be something worth pursuing. Is that a possibility?
Sure.
Yeah. Let's think about that. Thanks.
Joel, did you have something?
Thank you, Brad, for a good presentation. So the one information that's somewhat missing, you have different costs per tree by different conditions. You have those 3 different conditions. If you were going to plant the most trees, given a limited amount of money, you would plant the more inexpensive trees first, and then you'd plant the next expensive, and then last of all, you'd plant the most expensive. And that type of thing, do we know how many trees, if we followed that strategy in terms of making our downtown more attractive and trying to plant as many trees as possible, how many trees we would plant given that scenario? And then with that, there'll be some expensive planting sites that we may want to do regardless of the cost, just because of the benefit.
Right.
Because, it's the cost benefit ratio of planting trees will exceed the costs of planting all these trees. So,
Right.
so I was wondering what the answer to those 2 questions are, and I didn't have enough information to assess that.
Right, and no, we have not done that block by block analysis, say, okay, on, H, we need this type of tree, we need a planter or not, or we need a grate here, or we don't. I think that's where staff would request a little bit more time to go in and do that block by block analysis, so then we could give you a better figure.
And I was thinking a little bit outside the box, and I'm not sure this will work because I know it cannot work. I'm used to industrially planting trees at a cost of about $5 a tree. And it's with about 90% survival. And you plant 10 trees versus the one that you want, and you have to come back, because not all of them are going to live, so you plant more than you need. I don't know in this environment if, and then you protect them from the animals by putting up Vexar tubing or some other kind of protection. And in this case, the protection would be from humans and automobiles. And I don't know if some of that could be done on maybe lower risk sites and still to get the number of trees in there and be successful. And I know what the urban forester would say, he'd say probably not, but I just bring it up.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Kurt, then Rob.
Following on what DJ asked, could we either relocate or recycle some of the metal grates that are around existing mature trees and use them for the new plantings without risking the mature trees?
I don't know for sure. The ones that I've seen in other communities, they certainly are replaceable. You can, remove them and put them into there. It's assuming that your grate size is the same. That your well size is the same, I should say. Yeah. So if what I'm hearing, that idea is to just sort of look at, track, put him in certain places for a certain time of year or a certain number of years and then relocate those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at least we could test it out, see if we'd be risking any of the mature trees.
Rob?
So a few things. One, I guess, on the grade issue, I think everyone is overlooking one of the main reasons for the grade. Well, there's two reasons. One is to protect the tree. The other one's to prevent sprained ankles and broken ankles. We've had that scenario already happen in the downtown. So we don't need to do that, make that mistake again of having trees without appropriate grades. And so it almost doesn't even matter how old the tree or how well established the tree is. We still have, especially as rains come and whatever, and erosion happens, we still have potential trip hazards, broken ankle hazards, et cetera. It'd be a liability nightmare not to put grates around all the trees, my opinion. The other issue that Valerie said, I was actually amazed because I walk the northwest section a lot, and the sidewalks are, horrific. We all know that, giant heaves, et cetera. But I was amazed when I was walking in the northeast section of Portland several months back on sidewalks with old established trees. And I don't know enough about trees, and it was at night, so I couldn't tell you what species they were. It was amazing how there was virtually no heaves in the sidewalk at all. So I would really imagine that the specific species is critical there as far as what kind of damage it's going to do to the sidewalk. That would be a kind of a no-brainer. So I would be looking at the specific species. I also, because I'm also often amazed when you talk about composites, there's some composites it seems like, outlive steel. It's crazy. And you look at composites, in our mouth and dental work and things like that. So I'd like to see Jason come back with more information about the composites. If the steel is superior, and that's a question I don't know the answer to. It may not be superior from a durability standpoint. It might last 10 or 20 or 30 years without warping. So we need to know the answer to that before we commit to spending another $2,200 per tree well, because they might be really good. The composites might be really good.
Other questions? DJ?
Can I ask questions about lighting, or are we still on trees?
Go for it.
Okay. The task force for downtown had a recommendation in extending the lighting plan down past 3rd Street into that little junction of G
Right.
Street. I'm a fan of that idea because we have Depot Park right there. It might welcome traffic into that public land. Do we have similar infrastructure in those areas to extend that lighting plan down farther? Or are there any easily identified, hurdles to overcome to extend that plan?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the answer today on that because we would have to look at both the supports as well as the electrical infrastructure. So, but we can certainly do more analysis on that particular section. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't, if it was easily achieved, I think it's worth considering. Thanks.
Yep.
Aaron?
I just want to address some of the council's questions with regards to tree wells. Staff, Jason and I, and even Brad hadn't had an opportunity to discuss in some detail the composite tree wells, but we don't have any major reservations about composite tree wells. They are utilized in other municipalities. They are very durable. They may not last as long as steel tree wells, but the life expectancy of those, although it's hard to determine and say what the life expectancy is, the cost associated with those, when municipalities are looking at doing a large number of tree wells, the affordability is there to utilize the composite ones. And if 10 years down the road, one cracks or warps or breaks, you just get another one, and the cost is still outweighs the cost of the steel. So if we would not have an uncomfort level if council's like, yeah, we'd like to do all these tree wells, and for this budget, we would not have an uncomfort level with ordering composite tree wells.
Brian?
Yeah, I just have a question more about how we're going to proceed with this entire discussion, because I have questions about a bunch of different topics in this plan, and I don't want us to get this ball of wax too big to where it's unwieldy. So, you know, I have questions about the owl lot and street lighting and banners and the art walk and bump outs, so.
Okay, good point. Yeah, we should probably take it one at a time. And I think with trees, it seems like we'd kind of generally come to the conclusion we'd like a little bit more information about composite material. Keep that cost down, seems to be the way all the questions are going. And then DJ brought up lighting. So did you have something to do with lighting?
I did have one more question about the trees. In the plan that we have that identifies the locations, I didn't see anything in there that talks about the number of trees that those sites might be able to hold as far as the number of total trees. I don't know if that is 40 trees or 80 trees or 200 trees. Do we have any idea of how many trees we might be talking about if we put trees in all those areas?
We looked at it just at a pretty high level, and it's probably in that, you know, that 50 to 70 range.
Okay. And then it looks like we have $111,000 in that line item, which at $2,500 a tree would be about 40 to 50 trees. So it looks like we might have the budget to get all that done already.
Some of that 111,000, I believe, is allocated. When we bring back the information on the composites, I will confirm that, but I don't think that the full 111 would be available for this project, downtown tree lighting, tree planting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's get some more detailed information about locations and numbers of trees and the types of trees that are up for consideration as well when we talk about trees again. Brian, did you have something about lighting?
Yeah, I was going to follow up on what DJ said. It looks like there's a pretty broad scope for the lighting potential downtown. And I was just wondering, we still don't have any sort of estimated cost for that project. Is that right?
We have the estimate from Thornton is about 2.5 years old. So I would feel more comfortable, you know, re-looking at that and then just having them at the same time that they're bringing back those revised numbers include the scope that, you know, council wants to see in terms of if you want to expand, if you want to go third, you know, we'll look at that infrastructure on third. We can bring back, but it's, it's well below 350. I mean, that's again, just that includes, that was a number that was put in there for both some of the plaza work and the other. So I think their work for just the lighting on the other was more around the 100,000 range.
Okay, thanks.
Joel?
Well, one of the things that strikes me, Brad, is if you did all the trees, what would it cost? And if you did all the lighting, what it would cost? And then if there's a breakdown of if that was too much for the council to pay for, how would you cut it back to a little, not do it all at once? And so, do you know how much, if you planted every tree that was in the plan, how much it would cost today?
We don't, because we don't know how many of those are cutouts existing, you know, in terms of which locations, so.
Sure, and you could estimate it, but there would be some confidence interval around the estimate. And the same thing with the lighting because of the inflation. So what I'd like to, and the artwork with the art committee and what that costs. So I was thinking is, if we did the whole thing, what would, in terms of the art walk, the lights and the trees, what would it cost? And then if you wanted to cut it back incrementally, Where would you do that? And it's not like we want to micromanage this at all, but we need some big picture thing of what the total cost is, and then if you cut it back, what the impacts are, and then make a decision and do it. Because we've been talking about it for a long time, and I was ready to do it today, but evidently we don't have the information to do that. But I don't think it'll be that hard to get.
Well, we could bring sort of a phased plan to you that sort of has some
Sure.
blocks that are prioritized, and then
Right.
just as we run out of money, those next blocks won't be done until more money's allocated. So
Sure.
we could do that.
And I appreciate, given the other capital investments that the city's doing, your sensitivity to costs. That's really important, I think, to the citizens and to the council, so that's understandable. So, thank you.
Yep.
Valerie?
Yeah, I would agree with that to a certain extent, but I also need to remind us that it would be really nice to have an urban renewal plus in the downtown would be a really good place to have a visual of letting people see something happen. I know that it is in the urban renewal and it is cleaning up blight, and that kind of the fact that we've put this on the back burner. Of course, most of that was due to COVID, so it was not something we had control over. But I think it would be nice to see a full scale, picture of if we were to put all the trees in, if we had all the lights on G and H and 5th and 6th and up. And I'm assuming that the only place we would go up to extend the lights is on G Street up to 3rd. It would be nice to see the full blown and then walk backwards from that. And so, like I said, we could sit there and claw, but I would really like to see the costs of all this and see if, and make it happen, because I think we're kind of struggling with not having anything happen with our urban renewal, and this would be a real plus and would bring in a lot of excitement. So I'm really interested in, like the idea of going out, getting the full blown that we can back off of with the trees, with the lighting, with the artwork, and with the banners, and with the Owl Street Plaza. So those are the things I think that are the easiest for us to get. Maybe talk about bump outs or whatever on the plaza. I personally am not in favor of the G Street reconfiguration, and that is because I've heard from several people, and we've once again heard from our committee that was not their priority. So with that, I think the other things is what we need to focus on.
Okay, where in
So
did you have a
I would
question?
like to see it.
Did you
Well, the
have a,
question was, I guess, my question came was, is the G Street the only one where we're going up longer in distance? That was what my question was. That was when we're talking about the extension. I'm trying to remember exactly. The lighting we were talking about is the string lighting, if I'm not mistaken, on 5th Street, and the extension of the historical lights on G and H. Am I correct? I just want to make sure of what we're talking about.
Right. Well, I'm hearing a lot of uncertainty on the lighting piece today. I think what we need to do for the council is to actually bring a map with specific street level pictures and identify, exactly what the parameters of each block is and which ones we're talking about in terms of the street light standards as well as the string lights, because that conceptual plan that was done by Thornton a couple of years ago, it doesn't go into that level of detail. So I've taken some notes here. I think that's what we need to bring back, and with that we'll bring much more estimates, more specific cost and updated estimates. But to your question, Councilor, I think as it's been presented to date, yes, on G Street, it's between 6th and 3rd. So that is what is in the FY23 budget.
Okay, and that goes all the way past, is that the one that goes by Steam Distillery? Is that, I guess I'm not sure visually where 3rd Street is when you go down G.
No, it doesn't, you'd have to extend it, I think, a little bit further, if you wanted to go to Depot Park.
Okay, that is the extension then. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Third Street is the intersection with the lighting, Glass Forge. Yeah,
Forge,
so
yeah.
it's just half a block, I guess, before Climate City is really at Gilbert Creek, and that's kind of an awkward intersection, so it doesn't have a numbered street right there.
Yeah, and that's why I was unsure whether that was included in it or whether that was the extension we were talking about, but thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like for lighting, you're going to bring back kind of an overview of what that previous plan entails, along with some updated numbers. Okay, sounds good. Other questions about lighting? New topic, Art Walk? Anybody have anything, questions about what the Art Walk is, or? Well, yeah, go ahead with your comment, the way we're doing this, I guess.
I don't have any questions on the art walk, but just this last week, COPA did express interest in assisting with that when we're ready. So we do have help in that arena.
Brian?
I'd be more than happy to let COPA take that and run with it and present us with a recommendation on how to move forward.
DJ?
Yeah, I'm certainly into that too. Maybe create an actionable item for them to digest that issue, because I'm compelled to pursue a lot of these items, including Art Walk.
All right, council, you want to have COPA work on more plans for Art Walk? Seeing enough heads nod. Okay, we'll ask COPA to come up with more ideas for Art Walk. Yeah, Rob?
So to get an idea, like how often would they consider changing it and so forth? And would there be any increased cost associated with, in other words, I wouldn't imagine that you'd have art there forever, the same pieces. So when we ask them, I'd like to see if they have an idea of a continuum of how that would go over time.
Okay. All right, Brian, did you have a question about something else, a new topic?
Sure, yeah, I had a question about the banners and flags downtown. I don't know a lot about that as far as just kind of wondering what the banners or flags would look like. Would they be more of a permanent fixture? Would they be more event specific? Would they be changed out? I'm just looking to learn a little more about it.
Sure. So the concept that's been talked about at HBSC to date has been more the permanent. I mean, as permanent as banners can be. And that would have pretty simple language, really just, historic district and maybe the year. I'm going to look over at Ward to see if I'm missing something, but isn't that the basic concept I think that's been talked about with, some kind of, classic Grants Pass image, maybe kind of faded in the back, like, the Cape Man Bridge or something, but it would be pretty simplistic. But for the reason it's coming out of them is because, the historic district boundaries itself, which of course aren't equivalent to the central business district, but they're really close. So I guess what we would need to explore a little further is that if those blocks that HBSC has discussed to date and the light standards, if you want to go any further than that, but they were talked about as being, more or less a permanent feature that would get maintained in a good fashion, but pretty simple, and really let people know that, okay, yes, this is the historic district. So.
Okay, that sounds good. As with all these items, do we have an estimated cost or line item to pay for it with yet?
On the banners, we do not. We have explored with ODOT, and it does not sound like there's a good pot of money for banners through ODOT. There might be some private foundation that really focus on historic preservation interests. There might be some option there. There's looking like if you include the brackets and the banner, I think it was in the range of $150.
As I recall, at the last meeting or the one before, that the estimate to do
For all, yeah.
With a local contractor for all of the posts that we identified, which isn't on every street, but it's the main traffic flow.
Yeah.
So I think it was under 15,000.
Just to get that on, into the record, yeah, Ward Warren, the chair of the HBSC, was just saying they'd done some preliminary work, and it would be $15,000 was the estimate to do the spots that had been identified for that project. So it sounds like some work has already been done on that as far as identifying locations and analyzing whether or not there were the appropriate poles.
Correct. Some. We do need to bring back the sort of the final, ground truthing information to HBSC, because at this point, it's really just been more by GIS.
Okay. Is there any direction you need from the council in order to continue that project?
I don't think that from a staff standpoint, as long as you're comfortable with this general conversation that we've been having with HBSC, we'll just continue with that. Bring a couple of concepts forward, and then of course we need to identify some funding.
Okay. Val has something? Valerie?
Oh, I was just going to state, kind of like we had COPA take over that part on the art part of it, that sounds like I'm in support of historical sites taking over their historical district signage, and following up and working with the city on that. So, but I think that was already mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like they're already moving in that direction, and I don't see council having a huge problem with them pursuing, gathering some more information and making a plan for that. All right. Were there other topics? Brian?
Yes, I think we should talk about the owl lot. That's kind of the centerpiece of this whole discussion, in my opinion. So I'd really like to see us maybe move forward with something on that today.
Did you have any questions about the owl lot, or?
Honestly, I don't. I think, in the plan that they have given us a few options with a rolled curb design and some examples of what it could look like. So I think council just needs to maybe look at those and pick an option to move forward with.
All right. Does anybody else have questions about the owl lot? Joel?
Well, not only the owl lot, but the other items as well. We do have Jim Love with us, and I was wondering if there's anything from your perspective that we're missing, if we could ask him, because he was part of the task force and was kind of the instigator behind a lot of these ideas.
Did you have anything, Jim, that you wanted to add? Come up and make sure the mic is on, please.
Yes, just stepping back, perhaps even stepping out of the Owl Plaza role that I was involved with, but speaking as a tree committee member, we have identified approximately 32 locations in the downtown historic district that would not require tree grates, just to let you know about that. I was going to speak to that. Yeah, in terms of the Owl Plaza and Fifth Street configuration, the work that's been done so far is very conceptual in nature, just coming up with a general plan for it. Moving ahead, it does need to be surveyed, the actual plaza itself and Fifth Street. From that point, there would need to be a design team involved, so involving a civil engineer, lighting, and also landscape architect wouldn't have to be involved moving forward.
Rob?
Thanks, Jim. So when you say surveyed, do you mean like dimensionally, Or do you mean going around and talking to people?
No, an actual horizontal control
Thank you.
system and grades all that, yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thanks for being here.
Thank all of you.
Okay, so as far as the owl lot goes, we have this, some ideas about it, but there's not an actual plan in place. Is that where we're at?
That's correct. As Jim mentioned, in the terrain downtown plan, there is a page that's dedicated to some high-level concepts about it. But yeah, other than that, there has not been any RFP or any kind of work done by any designer.
And is there any funding, or is that, you said it might be included in the lighting? 350?
Correct. We do have in that LB 6392 that $350,000. I think some of that was available for some initial work, and that maybe starting with the survey. That's not going to be
So if
too
council
terribly
wanted to
much.
move forward with developing the plan, we have money there that we could use. Okay, Val has something.
I was just going to ask, I've seen the two different curbing levels, one of them which was the rounded curve and the other one a regular curve. And I think, that is a discussion that I think needs to be had. And I remember it in the past, but Jason, do you have anything to share on the thoughts on the difference between the two?
Jason has stepped out of the
stepped
room.
out.
Okay.
Does anybody else?
Because I do remember there being a discussion in the past, so it's kind of like, I know that this has been discussed in the past, it has been presented in the past, so I was just wondering if there was any visual or any information from the past that anybody can remember as to the pluses and minuses of the two choices.
Yeah, I know that, the Councilor, there was a comment, I believe, by Councilor Pell, some of the pros and cons a few months ago when you talked about this, about the curbless. There's potential safety issues there with cars coming up. There's stormwater issues that, need to be looked at when you remove a curb and gutter. It changes how stormwater is managed. There's really a lot of I think, exploration that needs to happen with that site on the pros and cons of either, because there's definitely pros and cons to both. But I don't. Jason's back now in the room. I don't know, Jason. The question was whether or not there's you had any more information about the difference in the curbing on a plaza.
It is, there are a lot of pros and cons. There's, what is the primary and secondary use of that area? Rolled curbs are great if primary use may be for pedestrian and open, where then secondary, you open it up during certain times of day or week or days of the week for traffic. Rolled curbs, you would have a concern with the current use of some of the businesses that are along and adjacent to the sidewalks that are using it for, say, parklets or eating outside on the sidewalk. The regular curb and gutter does provide more of a barrier between that area and the street. So there are a number of things to consider when you're looking at which one would work best. And I think part of it goes back to what it would be your primary and secondary use of that space.
So do you feel that we need to define what the goal is for that lot before we would move forward on making a plan? Is that the next step? I mean, before we put out an RFP for a designer, we would need to identify what we envision the usage to be?
I would. I do think that the uses are very important in terms of, from a design standpoint. That's one of the first questions they're going to ask. And if it's, if you're going to aim for multiple users in there, are you talking about maybe vendors on First Fridays? Is it trying to attract more music events? Is it just really going to be for the parking that's there now and then only, 6 or 7 times a year for events? I think that is going to have a significant role to play in the designer's analysis.
Brian?
So rather than having us discuss the merits of any particular features of what this lot could look like, I think that we have budget to get a designer to help us figure out what it would look like. So I'd be happy to just get it off council's plate. We have a budget here in the lighting item to look at it. I think that line item originally was for the plaza and lighting anyway. So I would love to see, I think council wants it to be a multi-use space that is a parking lot most of the time, but can also be utilized as a venue space or market space or whatever. So I think we generally all kind of agree on that. But it sounds like from Jim Love, the next step is to, get a designer and do a survey. So I'm happy to go ahead and move forward with that.
Any discussion? All right, we have budget. Are you ready to move forward with hiring a designer? I'm seeing Vanessa and Rick, Rob, Kurt, DJ. All right. And as Brian said, I guess that multi-use with parking being an ongoing consideration, is that still where we're all at? It sounds like that makes a difference in terms of how those curbs might be designed. All right. Anything further on this plan? Brian?
So the last thing that was in the downtown plan, and I don't know if the task force talked about this or not, but there was a section that talked about more intersection bump outs downtown. And there's a map in that plan and it has 7 different intersections where it's recommending some more pedestrian bump outs at the crosswalks. And did the task force discuss that piece at all, or?
We did, and we decided that.
Can you come up to the mic, please?
We did, and I think it was decided that whereas those were probably a good idea up around the courthouse, that we were not advocating for anything that takes away from more downtown parking, since we have lost more parking downtown than we've gained over the years. So I think that was basically the recommendation, that they're not really needed. We looked at accident statistics at the major intersections, and there was no really cause for alarm there. So I think that was basically the discussion, as I recall.
Okay, thank you.
Also, if I may, as far as the next step here, I think along with what Brian suggested, but I think, there's a plan. It seems that the council seems to be on board as far as moving forward with a lot of the elements in the plan that Brad just presented. And we have somebody here that basically put the plan together. And so if the will is there, it seems like it makes sense to move forward and have a landscape architect and an engineer work together and come up with an implementation list, cost estimates, and a timeline. So, I mean, that seems to make sense, that recommendation. Thank you.
Rob, did you have something?
So, since we don't know, if we take this out to an architect or whatever, and we have no idea if they specifically know anything about Grants Pass or where they might be in the country, it'd be really clear for them to know that, a third of the year, the first Fridays essentially don't have hardly any people walking around. It would be very unlikely that we'd have a reason or justification for using the owl space in the plaza for, through the entire winter. Now, obviously, we've got the Christmas tree action. But my point is, I guess, whatever designer that we go to needs to actually know what our weather is and what the likelihood is and what the need is also, because clearly, anywhere approximately 48 weeks a year, that's primarily a parking lot. And there's going to be some times when obviously there's great events to hold there. But I'd like to know that whoever we designate that to is really clear what our weather situation is and what our likelihood is for increased use once it's turned into a plaza.
Brian?
I just wanted to follow up a little more with the intersection bump outs, because they are recommended in Jim Love's report, and the task force, it sounds like, didn't necessarily see a need for them. So I might be interested in asking Jason and Wade to look at the locations that the report recommended to see what staff's opinion is on how beneficial putting bump outs at those locations would be, just so we can, I guess, get a third opinion to break the tie, so to speak.
Is anybody else interested in talking more about bump outs? Vanessa, yeah? Rob, yeah?
So just briefly, to elaborate a little bit, I mean, for instance, we all know that crossing 6th or crossing G can be really problematic, and I just picture in my mind times when I've seen people, with a baby carriage or whatever, trying to look out around, some big pickup truck or whatever it is. That's one type of situation, but I like on the corner of, say, 5th and H, I never see a problem with pedestrians crossing there. So to me, that's a really different discussion. And I'm not sure exactly where the bump outs are proposed, but some places it would seem as though they're kind of needed or maybe a no-brainer, and other places it's just as much a no-brainer that they're not needed.
Valerie?
Yes, I was just going to say, actually, you might talk with Wade and Jason, because one of the things that we do need to do is do more. Anytime we change or work on an intersection, we do need to make sure that we make them accessible, handicap accessible, and that's something that has to happen in any transportation plan and moving forward. So this might be a good time to take care of that in some of those areas at the same time, if it hasn't already happened.
Brian?
So I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating for us to do all the bump outs that are recommended, but I think having Public Works take a look at them and evaluate them one by one might be a good way to go.
All right, has that been done? It sounds like it hasn't been done yet, Jason.
No, I'm not very familiar with the plan. We can look at where they're called for. I know if you do work in the plaza and we do touch that intersection, we're gonna have to bring it up to ADA standards anyway. That might be a great time, as Councilor suggested, to evaluate whether we put a bump out there or not. We can get back with a council memo for you on that, though, on all of those that are in the plan.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great, to get a little more information about where the bump outs are located and how that overlaps with ADA as well. Anything further? DJ?
Sure. One small but unique recommendation that came out of the task force was large vehicle parking, particularly tour buses. Right now they just shuffle right into by the river, which is a fantastic tourist destination. But I'm fond of that idea, but I don't know the technical difficulties with, creating such a parking spot to welcome, more dedicated tour buses downtown. So I'd like to look into that. Is that an easy challenge to overcome or not? But I'd like to pursue that.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting note too. It seems like there's probably a location we could identify and let them know that that is the designated spot. Is your hand up about this, Rob? Go ahead.
Yeah, it would seem as though the Grasshopper lot has the space. I just don't know about, egress as far as what kind of turning radius and things like that for vehicles that size to get in and out safely. But it seems like that could be an ideal spot because there's clearly enough room there. But, or we can have a dedicated spot that's got nothing to do with parking currently, that's just dedicated to those big buses that would be easy for them to get in and out. That could definitely be worth exploring.
So would you all like to have staff look into what makes a good tour bus parking spot and see if we can identify something that's existing and get the word out there about where it is? Yeah, that was an easy one. Good job. DJ.
Sure, I have one more. This idea just came from discussions, and I think it's worthy to talk about. We have First Fridays every first Friday, and it's not really a, kind of a structured thing. So I really don't know how to approach this, but creation of more events kind of like that, maybe, twice a month, First Fridays. We couldn't call it First Fridays anymore. In fact, now that you're back here, this was your idea, by the way, Brian, to make First Friday maybe twice a month, or golly, every Friday or something like that. But since it's not really structured or ran by the city, I don't know how to go about, doing something like that, but it's a good idea regardless that I think is deserving in the conversation.
Rob, then Brian.
Yeah, I guess in a perfect world, maybe it would be. Realistically, years ago when First Friday was absolutely jamming and the downtown was packed, I mean, just shoulder to shoulder, it was really festive, and it kind of was self-feeding because there was so much energy and so much business that was created that it was easy for merchants to keep their enthusiasm for it. And over the year, well, then it got too popular. Too many kids came in, and I'm now the old guy, get off my lawn. Too many kids came downtown and quite frankly ruined the event. And then of course we also had RV Salt Shakers doing their part to ruin the event. So it became much, much smaller. People had much less enthusiasm for it. Right, and I can tell you that just the merchants right now that do stay open or do try to organize, it's tough to keep their enthusiasm for it once a month because it's not really that sustaining. You don't make a lot of money doing it, very few. Some might, but so there's not really a great payoff like there once was. So while it might be nice to have twice a month or every week or whatever, practically speaking, put yourself in the position of the merchants that have to get enthusiastic, be able to man their stores during the day, and then also, and they might already be working 6 days a week, now you got to add a night to it. It's easier said than done is my point. So we can pontificate about it, whether or not it would actually happen and people would enthusiastically, meaning the merchants would enthusiastically want to work harder to make it happen. I don't see that happening.
Brian?
So just to follow up on DJ's comment, one way to help make that happen would be, for example, have a third Friday a month, and then at the Owl Lot, there's music. We have, because when Art Along the Rogue that Friday, it coincidentally was also First Friday, downtown was jamming. So if we had like a third Friday with like music, the Owl Lot, that was more of a draw to bring people downtown on that second event Friday of the month, that could be one way to do it.
I think this is one of the things that we lost with the switch in how tourism is handled, because First Fridays used to be organized by John Bowen, and right now that's not a service that the city is helping with, and the merchants are doing it on their own. So I think if council wants more organization of downtown events or just activities in general, that's a different level of service than what we're currently offering. So whole different discussion. But I do like the idea. Are we done with infrastructure discussion? Moving on to Welcome Center. Let me see if, check Valerie's hand. Okay, I don't see any hands. Okay, we are going to move on then to Welcome Center.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before I started, I did want to give a little bit of a news update. We have had a very significant water main break that has affected most users in the lower pressure zone. Everybody probably experienced a slight decrease in pressure. We're probably going to be sending out some very targeted messaging to some customers here shortly. We're in contact with the state of Oregon, but essentially a 12-inch water line completely separated, which almost never happens, caused reservoirs to drain and a really significant drop in pressure. So did want to let you know that the crews are on top of it. They've got it now under control, and at least we're not draining the reservoirs anymore, but it was very, very significant. Probably the biggest one I've seen in my entire career here. So pretty exciting morning for Monday. The teams are ready for a break. So Welcome Center remodel. What we're looking for is final direction from you to get this Welcome Center remodel moving forward. The relationship to your council goals is to maintain, operate, and expand the infrastructure, and this is the Welcome Center facade improvements. So this has been a priority of the council for several years. We've presented several options both to the Historic Buildings and Sites Commission and to yourselves. General direction was for alternative 4 with the potential to put in garage-style doors for enhanced flow through the building for potential events. Staff provided some artist concepts of the doors and was asked by you for some additional concepts, including potential different style doors, but definitely showing them in some different locations. So I wanted to come back with those and get direction. This was in concept number 4, which was in general what the HBSC had suggested might be appropriate. We'll talk about all of the options here again in a sec. And then we bring back our first revised option. This is with garage doors on the east side. This is showing a very typical standard garage roll-up with an inside track. We did not show all of the different styles of doors on all of the faces, so you're going to have to use your imagination as we go through these. I was trying to be a little bit frugal with the dollars. Every time we have an architect redraw these, he sends us a bill. So another look would be, here's where it was on the east side, and this side is probably the snuggest with the least opportunity for gathering. This is a French style of door though, shown in a couple of different modes of open and fully open. So there is some potential there. You can imagine that on either the east or the north. Sorry, I said the wrong side there. That's the south side. And then this is on the north side. This is a bifold door. This one, when it folds up, actually kind of makes its own canopy over the door, kind of keep off a little bit of the rain. And so those were the door options. The floor plan options, we have not changed anything at this juncture. Council did provide direction to put in 3 exterior facing restrooms. That's still what we are going with. This layout gives us the best blend of the exterior restrooms along with the interior office support for Brad and his team to work down there. It was made a suggestion by Chair Warren of the HBSC, and this was not a recommendation. He just mentioned that maybe we should look at the north wall, which is not a bad thing. However, I do want to point out the north wall is where all of the power and all of the mechanical systems are for the building. So if we're going to look at moving, sorry, west wall, thank you. West wall. Sorry, word. It was not a recommendation, but it is something that we can look at. We just would like to put out there that it will greatly increase the cost of the project because that is where all of the mechanical systems are, and those would all have to be relocated to be able to put in roll-up doors on the west. That's where the plaza is, and there is the most amount of room for gathering if you want to open the building up.
So the space where we've been talking about the restrooms on the
Yes.
backside.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry for getting that wrong direction. So a couple other thoughts. I know Brad and his team have voiced some concern about the potential of roll-up doors and being able to get good seals on those and, you know, potential weather issues. These are done in other locations, so it is something that can be overcome, but it is a concern for you guys to consider, as well as the potential for added noise, just because you're taking out a lot of wall and insulation and replacing that with a glass wall, which will likely let in more noise from the road. So at your last discussion, you did bring up that you wanted to relook at all of the options. So I did put in your packet all of the previous concept drawings. I'm just going to kind of scroll through these because I know that you have them in your packet. And these were looked at both by you and the Historic Sites and Buildings Commission. As you recall, they did provide a recommendation for number 4 or its original look, which they preferred even more, which was the white one, which I will get to at the end here, which is original Colonial Bank Plaza, which is this building here. And then also at your last meeting, I did hear mention possibly looking at the plaza out the back. So I wanted to provide a couple of shots of that. It is in pretty bad shape, especially if we are going to increase the use of restrooms out of the back. We're probably going to want to do some sort of refurbishment back there. That can be added to this project or taken forward as a separate project, but you can see how uneven it is, especially with ADA access. It might be problematic and something that we'll want to consider. So where we're at is pending direction from you. We will complete the final design and specifications so that we have a bid-ready package for contractors. We will need to begin the planning and permitting process. That will include a Historic Buildings and Site Commission full official review, which they will then provide recommendations on materials, design features, that type of thing, and then we'll finalize the design back for construction. We would then solicit bids for your consideration and hopefully begin construction. The project currently has a balance of about $580,000. It is estimated that the upgrade is going to cost in excess of about $250,000, plus a potential $70,000 more for exterior and mechanical modifications, depending on any roll-up door options. If we choose to go without the roll-up doors, those costs will come down. Formal cost estimates will be generated after we select a final design. And then I have a page full of potential options for you for your consideration and discussion, and we'd love to answer any questions or go back to any particular design feature that you wanted to look at.
Do you have any information on the different costs of the different types of window doors?
No, but I'm asking Wade right now to do that, and I'm going to grab my phone and he might be able to text me that information.
Okay. Other questions? Rob and then Rick.
So on the floor plan that's on page 11, I guess it's also drawing 11 or slide 11, on the, so you got slide 11? Yeah.
I'm getting there.
Thank you. So on the, what would be the southeast section there that's open, that's not an office currently, would that section be roughly 12 feet in width? I can't quite read my...
It's a little bit more than that. It's probably around 13 or 14. This office right here is 12 feet in length.
So if we had a roll-up door there, what we potentially would be gaining would be a 14-foot open area to the outside.
Yeah, it'd probably be a little less. I bet the roll-up, you probably wouldn't want to go too much more than 12 foot with the roll-up door because you're still going to want structural sides right there.
Thank you.
Rick?
Thank you, Jason. When we were at the League of Oregon Cities, we walked around and we saw some of the bifold doors, which was very interesting, and some of them had character to them. They just weren't glass. Yeah. So I would be in favor of seeing what those would cost as well, and as part of that concept. But I think there is potential to really change the character of the building and yet maintain endorsement of the historic look. Thank you.
Okay. I got a note.
Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. On the interior design, I really appreciate the work that staff has put into it with getting the bathrooms on the back and making all the interior space super usable. The only little question I had is, would it be possible on the back of the building? I see there's 2 sinks on the back. Would it also be possible potentially to put maybe like a water fountain back there somewhere? And then I was also thinking maybe in the Welcome Center area for the public, if there might be potential for putting like a water bottle filler in there for people that come in.
I'm sure there is. We can look into that.
Okay, thanks.
Valerie?
Yes, I have a question about the setbacks and landscaping, because I do like the number 4 with the south, and I don't even think it needs to necessarily be glass, as Rick mentioned, because that opening that up a little bit just gets a little circulation, like people coming in the front door, going at the side door during an event. It just gives it a little bit of circulation. I like that, but I also know there's landscaping out there right now, and I think that is it possible to, as you're building and redoing the back, to continue that brickwork or whatever around and not have landscaping along that wall to widen that sidewalk area on the south side?
I'm looking at our planning director, who can give me direction on that. I actually can't answer that question.
Okay.
Counselor, so we're talking about the G Street side?
Yes.
Yes, the G Street side, because I know a couple weeks ago I was out setting up a table out back in that little plaza area back where the restrooms were, and I watched a lot of people from First Friday come walking over and using the bathroom, which was great. And you're right, it's a trip hazard over there and it's kind of combobulated. But if you made that plaza kind of back there and then continued it up around the side to where the doorway was and didn't have that landscaping there, it seemed like it would open up that sidewalk and make it a little bit more accessible. So I wanted to know if that was a possibility, to having like any kind of cobblestone brick that is currently back behind, just continue up that side, the south side of the building.
Yeah, the development code only requires the landscaping adjacent to parking. So on the opposite side, with the Dutch Bros, you do have some required parking under the code between in off-street parking areas. But on this side, there's not. There's a 0-foot building setback. So that would be an option.
Okay, so I do know that it would add some sidewalk space and make that whole, like a circulation section, be something that could happen, say on a First Friday, or if you wanted it to. And I agree the glass might not be a sound barrier, but if you could have just like some sort of regular door on the south side, I think that might be a plus.
By regular door, are you still saying a door that opens up to the sidewalk like that, but not made of glass? Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, yeah, if the glass one was an issue in breaking the glass, as Rick had mentioned, seeing something, maybe I like the idea of a door on that side, and that makes to make sense, most sense for where it should be. I was just not sure the best material. And once again, want to make it cost effective and comfortable.
Gotcha. DJ?
Sure, yeah, building on with that a little bit on the south side, it's, my concern's mainly for foot traffic flow on the south and the west side. In walking in that area, it's awkward. There's a lot of posted signage on the sidewalk, and the landscape shrubbery. It's awkward for people to, that foot traffic flow. We need to pay some attention to that, it's my opinion.
Trying to get there, sorry.
And if we don't have a strict landscaping requirement on that side, I think Valerie has a good idea of creating sort of a better walkway. If we wanted another opening, that's fine. Generally, the floor plan looks great. If we want those public restrooms in the back, I think whoever designed this did a really good job in putting those restrooms in there, creating the ADA compliance and office spaces for future. I couldn't have designed it any better, let's just put it that way. The conversation of the open door area. The most compelling argument I've heard in contrary to it is pollutants, noise, dust, those kind of different things. And then we also need to be cognizant of the historic integrity of that building. But other than that, we're really close. Good job on that design work.
When was this building built? Do you have that handy? Or
I
do
don't
you
know off the
offhand?
top of, I don't know off the top of my head.
Just concerned me when he said historic integrity. I think it might be younger than I am, but. Joel?
Well, it's really exciting to see us making progress. One of the things I wanted to do was we have the chair here of the Historic Commission, and to hear from him on this after he's listened to all of us and give us the feedback, not just of his opinion, but of the commission.
Do we have other questions for Brad? Are we moving on to discussion? Questions? All right, thanks, Brad. All right, discussion. Brian?
So as it sits right now, we're looking at, on slide 4 or slide 5, we're looking at that design. And if I'm being perfectly honest, that design looks like it's straight out of the 90s. It looks really dated. It does not look like something that we would be putting hundreds of thousands of dollars into to attract visitors into. So I personally am not a huge fan of this design. And then I also want to say with regards to the building, I understand that it's in the historic district, but it's also the downtown welcome center, and the primary purpose of that building is to welcome visitors and to draw people in. So I know we've been getting guidance from HPSC on the design, but it's a tourist facility, and we haven't solicited any input from the tourism committee. So I'm a little hesitant to put too much weight behind HPSC's recommendations when this is our downtown tourist facility. It's in the heart of downtown. That's its main goal, is to be, welcoming visitors. So I'm looking at this project through that lens a little bit more than through a historic lens. Taking that building back to the original design is not going to do anything for drawing in visitors. So I personally, and the designs that we had to choose from were all very old. They were not done by any sort of architect or designer. I would be in favor of having, a designer give us a more up-to-date rendition of what this could look like. I think a design that incorporates a lot of brick, so it mixes in with the historic feel of downtown, but also, a lot of glass too, to kind of make it inviting for people, so people can see in, people want to come in. I think that would give it a nice clean look. It would kind of bridge the gap between historic and a little bit more modern. And I think that has the potential to be really inviting for guests. And I just wanted to also say on the big roll-up doors, I think I'm more in favor of like a French door, like a sliding panel door where they're kind of, there's multiple pieces. On slide 7, you can kind of see an example. It's like an accordion door almost. There's more room on the front of the building for those. The landscape area is a little bigger. The sidewalk's a few feet wider there. It also faces 6th Street, so it's going to be more visible to people. And I would only envision those doors being open maybe on maybe every Friday. It's not something to where they're going to be open when the visitor center is open, but just like maybe Friday night they open them up. I think the whole goal behind doing that was to make an inviting space for, maybe we have a winery come in and do tastings that can bring people in, or we have a musician sitting out there, in front of the building or inside the building that draws people in. Just something to make it more engaging with people in those situations where there's a lot of people downtown. So that limited scope makes me a little bit less concerned with the noise and pollution, because in my opinion, most of those times those doors would be closed. But anyway, I'm in favor of kind of looking at a little bit more updated design than what we have to work with here.
And your preferences for the doors on the front?
Yeah, I think the doors on the front would be the most effective. The side's a little cramped. There's not quite as much space there. The sidewalk's 5 feet compared to 8 feet, and then the landscape buffer, I think, is even thinner on the side than it is on the front. And it's less visible to people traveling through town.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, actually, from a tourism perspective, this building was looked at, and maybe Aaron or Brad, actually might have predated Brad, but one of the DMOs, one of the companies that was, one of the consultants before the city hired the group that currently ended up getting the contract, the DMO, actually did look at this from a tourism perspective. And if I remember, and I didn't keep, any of the information, but what they talked about mostly, if I remember correctly, was the lack of signage was, ridiculous. There was no way for tourists to even know that that was a visitor center. They also talked about the interior, the layout, that it didn't function well, and they gave very specific recommendations, actually. Do you remember that, Aaron? Yeah. So maybe you have that in writing somewhere, but it was looked at from a tourism perspective, and they didn't actually talk about the exterior being insufficient or being, creating any kind of deterrence, or it wasn't the fact that it wasn't creating lack of draw. It wasn't a lack of a draw. So it's not to say that it couldn't be improved, but I also would like to say, as far as the choices that the HPSC was given, I'm not 100% sure how that was created, but I know that Dave Reeves came up with these choices. It was not his area of expertise by any stretch of the imagination. And at that time, I think there was still some thought that it was going to tie into some river district plan or something that was going on down by the river. The choices that the HPSC was given, I don't particularly like any of them. I much prefer the look of the original Ben Franklin Bank, which is 21. To me, it looks much cleaner. It looks more historic. It may be a little bland just by itself, but I also think that it could be probably possibly some black or black shutters or something like that would be historically reasonable for a colonial. And I would prefer a look like that. To me, it's cleaner. It looks historic to me, and I think, quite frankly, brick and tall glass, I think, is quite frankly an insult to the historic district, and I just don't see it fitting in there. I think that, in our mind, one of the primary goals was, of course, and as silly as it sounds, one of our primary goals was to have good bathrooms, and I think this plan has really accomplished that, or will accomplish that. We want to have a place that is easily identifiable, which again, I think signage will do as far as being inviting for tourists, or at least identifying, for tourists to be able to identify. That's where you can get your information. We've got waysigning, information about that, and we have the original or the recommendations of that one DMO consultant that also talked about signage. So I think there's ways to make this more inviting or more noticeable by tourists without really having, floor-to-ceiling glass that I think is actually an insult to the area that it's in, regardless of how much brick you would spruce it up with. But I think I like the white colonial Ben Franklin look. I think if we were going to do any kind of larger doors, I would do them on the south side. It is unfortunate that that inside area is only going to be 12 to 14 feet. It really, it's almost not even worth having doors for that, because it's side doors, because there's almost no space in there for much of anything. I suppose you could have some flow through or walk around, as Valerie was saying, and there may be some benefit to that occasionally, and it may make it a more inviting and more flexible use by having some opening on that south side. I just don't see it being large enough to be significant for any kind of events. But again, I'd like to not consider all the renditions that were done basically by Dave Reeves to match a project that never really happened down by the river, and go with the Ben Franklin Bank look.
Joel?
Well, I agree with Rob. The one thing I really like is a little platform up on top. It seems like you could put some things up there that would be really attractive as well, but maybe not. I don't know. I'm not I'm kind of amused by 8 people trying to design a building in a public meeting. And I kind of struggle a little bit with that. And I don't mean to make fun of it or anything, but geez, that's quite a task. The other thing I would ask is if we do change this significantly, we need to hear from the chair and perhaps the committee and perhaps committees as we go through this. And the other thing is, this is about the 3rd time we've talked about this. And if you have 8 people trying to design a building in a 1-hour public meeting, it takes at least three meetings. It might take 10. So I just ask that we stick to our policy and priorities and let people that have the expertise in design and do their job and move ahead for the citizens of Grants Pass.
DJ?
Sure. From the historic perspective, there's nothing wrong with colonial. It would fit. I guess from the other side, working back to where we should be, I'm not a fan of the lick and stick river rock kind of a look. We need to make the Welcome Center welcoming. So I certainly agree with that. It needs to pop, and right now it doesn't. It blends in. It's just this corner that people kind of walk by and ignore, and sometimes just so happen to see that it's a welcome center. So that's kind of a big picture view that I'm having. Of course, the HBSC is going to be reviewing any design proposals for the remodel, so they're going to be involved. Do we marry one of these designs? I don't really see that we necessarily have to. All these ideas are good ideas, but big picture, flow of traffic, pop, welcoming, that's what we should be going after. That being said, we do have Ward Warren here, and I'm sure there's an opinion of the HBSC, and I'd like to welcome that opinion to the discussion.
Ward, did you want to take the mic?
Thank you. Déjà vu. I don't know much French, but I do know those 2 words. Basically, I think it's important that, we're looking at architectural style at the entrance to the historic district, and I get all the comments on making it more welcoming. And I mean, if you look at that, I agree, the signage on there just blends right into the building. It doesn't stand out at all. Same thing on the front of the building. So the signage definitely needs to be improved. Number 1. Number 2, I agree, that doesn't look very inviting or attractive right there. And I think that really is, should be kind of looked at by a landscape architect who could make some suggestions as to how to address that and make it look a lot more inviting. Now, I'm not speaking for the commission, Historic Commission, I'm speaking for myself here when I say, based on this conversation today, that I personally, functionality is important to this Historic Commission, that we don't just look and draw the line and say, no, you can't do that on a building, but we do try and look at how appropriate is it, and this is the gateway, the entrance to our national G Street Historic District, so it's important. The character and the historic integrity and the authenticity may not mean much to some people, but to us it does. And to a lot of people that come to this town. I mean, I remember ODOT saying years ago that a historic district was the number 3 thing that got people off of the freeway to come into a town, behind, you know, gas, food, and relieving yourself. You know, a historic district was the number 3 draw. But functionality is important, but I think we have to keep in mind what was the purpose of this building, which started basically, became a reality because of the reconstruction of 6th and 7th Street plan in the early 90s, that we didn't have a downtown restroom facility, and we realized that that was important. And so what is the purpose besides, it's basically a downtown visitor information center where people can come in and ask questions, get brochures, get a historic district map, use the restrooms, you know, all of those things are really important. You know, based on the conversation about glass, I absolutely am opposed to, and so is the commission, to redoing the front of the building. However, Valerie said, and I think a couple other people agreed with that, about the glass on the south side, although I think, you know, we were basically opposed to that after seeing that rendition, which I think the staff has done a great job in presenting some options there. I think that the glass facing G Street on the south side that we're looking at right there, if it were the French doors, I think that I could live with that. I think that's a good compromise. I don't think it'll get used a lot, but I think it would look nice, and it would probably be used occasionally. So I think that would be a good compromise. I don't know why in the renderings they have changed the, you know, the columns that are on the entryway from kind of double post to single post. I think that the original bank that's on your cover, you can see how those columns and posts are there, and I think that's much more desirable in terms of putting across a colonial style. As far as the brick, the conversation with the commission was that, you know, a colonial style building is already historic, so you don't need to dress it up. You know, there's really not a need to put brick on it to make it look historic. However, if everybody thinks that, you know, that somehow the public will look, oh, look, there's brick, and subconsciously say, you know, that's more historic. I mean, we could live with that. And that's why we chose number 4, because that rendering, because it did have brick on the lower portion. And so I think that if the council wants to have brick on there, I think that not the whole building, but just on the bottom portion, I think that the commission probably, from the discussions we've had, would accept that. And I don't know, but I think that they would also probably see the logic in increasing the functionality, even though it's not historically probably accurate, but putting those glass French doors on the south side there, and then improving the landscaping around the building to make it more inviting and improving the signage. But I would like to mention the comments of, because I think it's important that people that basically live in that building, the employees that spend 8 hours a day or whatever in there, when I spoke with Kate Bortels, which I think many of you probably know Kate, she's been working in there for 4 or 5 years, I believe, and I think she still does. But when I talked to her a few months ago and I asked her about the roll-up door on the front, I also asked her about the restroom configuration, and her comments were that even on nice days they never opened that front door, because any of you know, if you just go and stand on the corner of 6th and G, the noise factor, I mean, you can't hear, if you're standing there trying to talk to someone, you can't carry on a conversation because people are coming by, there's a stoplight there, they're revving their engines, you know, they have the loud bass thing that rattles the windows. So she said because of the noise factor, as well as the toxic fumes, and I mean, that's a reality that there's a monitor, used to be at least, to monitor air pollution in Grants Pass. It used to be on the wing building. And why? Because that particular intersection with a stoplight there, and because it's the center of downtown, has more cars going at a slower speed and idling and putting out emissions. And those are not really healthy to be breathing. And she said they had to mop regularly, clean regularly, and the mop was always black. So you can discount the CO2 and the carbon monoxide and dioxide and sulfur oxide and nitrogen and all those other things, but I would think those that are, I would think that those factors would be something that people that have to inhabit that building for 8 hours a day, should consider. But anyway, I think that there are some good ideas there that you've made today in this discussion, and I think the Portland Loo, which was part of the original discussion, I think that's still really valid, and I think a 24-hour restroom at a welcome center in the center of downtown is probably the best place for one. And if you have another one a block away at 7th and G or at 5th and H, I think that services that need. So, thank you.
All right, thanks. Council, I guess I wonder, go ahead.
I know,
Val.
I've had my hand up for a while, so.
Oh, okay, I can't see
Can you
your
hear me?
hand. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to keep this short and sweet, but I will say, number one, thank you, Warren, for bringing up the emission part of it, because that is the one part of town where we do have an emission problem, is right downtown. I think that's a very valid point. I would like to bring up what Jason said when he first spoke. He said we are looking for a final on this project. We've been hammering our head now for 5 years. When I sat out there the other day and watched the number of people that were coming in and out using that outhouse, it was a problem and it wasn't well taken care of for First Friday. I think our number one primary is to get the restrooms in there functioning and to get it done. Every time we bring this back for one more rendition, you're talking about architectural review and you're talking about staff time. So I personally would like to go with number 4, look at a door on that side that could be open for circulation during a First Friday and move on, because in listening to Ward, the HSBC did approve number 4. It was approved and went around numerous committees at the time, in the last 5 years. So I think people have kind of gotten by and said, yeah, we can live with that, and the bricks do tie in, and yes, we need to do some sort of, flags. If you did, you could actually even not have landscaping right in the front on, if based on what Brad said, on 6th Street, you could have that whole area bricked around, and you could have a circulation and music and something on a First Friday, and the rest of the time it would be comfortable. So I just think that we're beating this like a dead horse, and I'd really rather just move on with the final rendition and give the direction so that it can be up and taken care of over this winter and be ready to move in spring. I'm done.
All right, Val, did you say that your preference is to have French doors on the side?
Yes, either French doors or whatever kind of doors would fit there for double opening. So French doors would probably, I'd rather have French doors than an opening door up. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Brian?
I agree with Joel that trying to design a building amongst 8 counselors is an exercise in futility. However, I do think that we all largely agree on the interior design. So I think, at least in my opinion, we can certainly give the green light on that piece. I also think that most of us would probably agree that that area behind the building could certainly use a redesign and a redo. So those feel pretty clear to me. With regard to the facade of the building, I'm not going to butt heads with Ward or anybody else about this. It's not, something I'm going to fall on my sword for. But I do think that the number 4 design is super dated. I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors by using that design. It's not very inviting. I personally would like to have a design architect give us an option, and I know that that might add a few months, but if if we're going to be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and this is our downtown welcome center, I'd be willing to wait a few months. I don't consider that kicking the can down the road. I consider that going slow to go fast. I'm not a designer, but this number 4 design, we can do better.
Vanessa?
I also am not in favor of any of the facades that were introduced, particularly the Ben Franklin design. We really do want something that is eye-catching. We want people to, if they miss the building, we want them to turn around and get inside of that building. I also in support of, Councilor Lovelace had said to reduce landscaping on the south side for the large opening, and I don't particularly have a preference of accordion versus French, just as long as it's a large opening that's inviting to pedestrians. I think that that would be great to expand that space on the south side, and bringing the cobble brick from the south to the west. I think that that would be a great design. There are floor-to-ceiling windows directly east of the Welcome Center, and I don't think that that looks terrible in that area, so I think that that might be an idea worth pursuing along with brick for that center. Like Councilor DeLagrange said, we really want this building to pop. We don't want it to blend. Chair Warren, I think, had a great point about the signage improvements. I would like to see a perpendicular sign on the east of the building that notifies east traffic and north to south traffic there of the Welcome Center. And I'll hold my discussion for that back landscaping area for when we're there.
DJ?
Yeah, I just had wanted to clarify where Valerie was a proponent of the large door, and that's the south side. Is that right? Is that what you, okay. That just clarification, thanks.
Okay, we have a couple of different things going on here, and I think maybe the easiest spot to start is just which side are we talking about putting large doors on? And I think that I've maybe heard more support for the south side, the G Street side. So who is supportive of putting the larger doors on the G Street side? Please raise your hand.
Well, as long as they're French doors, I think that would be good. I think.
Well, I'm not going to get into style of doors. We're talking about location right now.
Yeah.
Let's take
Well,
one.
if it's the French doors, I'd have thumbs up. If it's a roll-up door, I don't.
Okay, well, okay. Large door on the G Street side. I'm seeing Vanessa and Rick and Joel, kind of. And Valerie, you were for the G Street side, I think, right? She was. So that is 3.5 for G Street.
Yes. Yes, I said yes. I did say south on my email to you, my
Okay.
text, so south.
Okay. And on the front side, who would, oh, you were, yes, there too, that G Street side, 4.5. Who prefers to put large doors on the front side of the building, the 6th Street side? No hands going up for that. Who does not want large doors at all? Okay. I think we have a slight majority for larger doors on the G Street side of the building, and Joel felt strongly he wants them to be accordion or French doors, which is actually the only thing I've heard people really talking about anyhow. So does anybody want to make a pitch for garage doors rather than something that slides sideways? Okay, no. Okay, G Street side with some sort of sliding door feature. We don't know exactly how much those would cost. There's a couple different styles, but French doors or accordion. Maybe there's other names for things. I'm not a big door purchasing person, so I don't know. Okay, siding. I think everybody seems pretty good with leaving the bathrooms and indoor plan overall how it is, right? Haven't heard any discussion about that one. Okay. So if we're talking about putting sliding doors on the side, and so a discussion just about the look, the facade appearance. So I'm turning here to slide page number 16 in our packet, which shows drawing number 4 is kind of the direction we've been moving in, but we've had some discussion about different looks. And I guess who wants to move forward with with design number 4? Let's do that. If we have a majority who want to move forward with design number 4, then we won't continue the discussion about siding. So raise your hand if you like the look of design number 4.
I'm raising my hand.
Okay. You might be the only one. Okay, so people aren't loving this. Okay, people are not loving this design, so we need to figure out what design we want to move forward with. I know a couple people along the way have mentioned they like the kind of classic Ben Franklin design, which I've confirmed was built in either 1980 or 1981. The colonial era was 100 years before Grants Pass was founded, and it was on the other side of the country. So I'm just going to point out to you all that as far as historic significance is concerned, this building is in fact younger than me and does not in any way represent historic Pacific Northwest Grants Pass. But please move forward with your discussion. Who wants to talk about the siding? Joel, then Brian. Go ahead, Joel.
I thought you wanted to know who was interested. I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
Okay, we'll just move on to Brian.
The reason I'm going to vote for the original is that was the Historic Commission wanted that, and it is unique regardless of whether you were born on the East Coast or West Coast, and it's part of the historic district.
Okay, Brian?
I don't think we have any architects on the dais. I would be interested in either getting an outside opinion from an architect or getting an opinion from tourism committee, or even getting an opinion from Tori, who is running the DMO for us and knows a lot about tourism. But getting an outside opinion from someone that knows more about this than we do is something I would be interested in.
Okay. Valerie?
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was unmuted. Obviously, number 4, I was just trying to keep it simple because I knew it had already gone through the process, and so it would be the easiest to move forward with. I have no problem bringing it back to the tourism committee and Tori. If that would be another route to go, and having them look at the renditions or come up with a rendition of their own. But I don't particularly like the colonial. I never liked it. You know, I've been here for 50 years and I never had a real allegiance to it. I love the character of downtown that I love is the bricks and the, whatever those green hangy things are, or the name, but to me, that is what is historic, feels historic to me. So whatever you decide, I'll go with, because obviously mine didn't go, but I am not in favor of the historic colonial, and if bring it to the tourism or another committee helps, then so be it.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, for pretty much the same reason that Joel said. I mean, I would prefer the colonial look. However, if I had to choose today, and I'm willing to choose today, I would choose number 4. I mean, we can keep asking people forever, I guess, and maybe we'll get a consensus, or maybe we'll just get more opinions that one or two particular counselors want to hear. But we actually did go to an outside group. We went to the Historic Building Sites Commission. That may not be the group that Brian particularly wants to hear from on this issue. So we want to hear from another group, I guess, and maybe we'll get the opinion that he'd like then, and then we can vote. But I'll go, well, that's exactly what's happening. Thank you. I don't believe we have an expert in this particular area. Exactly. So we can go keep asking until we get one that agrees with you. But, and that's fine. We can do it. We can kick the can down the road, and maybe we'll finalize it on our next meeting. But otherwise, I would choose 4 if nobody at the Colonial, nobody likes or not enough people like the Colonial look.
Rick?
I'd like to muddy the waters. I come from Connecticut, where Colonial is the basic style back there. But when I look at this building here, and I was in town when this was built, while it's pleasing, when the focus is for a welcome center and so forth, and really recognizing the style that we have on G Street, I think some minor modifications would be appropriate. I really like the idea of brick in item 4 being on the bottom, but I also think the existing windows that are on the front on 6th Street could still be retained, but new caps, something else put on the top, because the metal, I think it's a metal cap that's put on top of those windows, really is not, to me, doesn't match the historic style. So I think some other gingerbread things could be done there, and we could possibly move forward. Thank you.
All right, somebody else who hasn't, did you chime in, Joel? Go ahead. Well, you said you like Ben Franklin. Is there something else to say?
Well, I can accept 4, and with those modifications above the window, you know, I'm not sure what you're talking about. My wife does all the design, so I'm not too concerned about it one way or the other.
DJ?
Yeah, I guess if we have to kind of lay down the opinion, I'm not on fire for the Colonial look. I do think we need to keep it historic. It seems that my issues with the Welcome Center as it is now is that it's just sort of camouflaged in the corner. As long as we're maintaining historic integrity of the area, most of the issues I have with this seems to be able to be solved with a coat of paint, more welcoming signage, and the landscaping around the perimeter. I think that's the major things I'm really focusing on is foot traffic and pop value. And if it complies with some sort of historic architecture, I'm ready to leave it alone. Leave the whole discussion of design alone, really. I'm trying to stand back into a larger view about what's beneficial for the Welcome Center, rather than what kind of siding we should hang on the side as right now.
Brian?
Given how fragmented we are, I don't think we have a majority for the Colonial. I don't think we have a majority for the number 4. I'm inclined to follow up with what DJ just said. And I know the siding does need to be replaced because it's pulling away from the building and it's kind of cracking. So it does need to be replaced. But I'm inclined to just kind of, you know, smooth this whole piece out and take DJ's approach and just kind of maybe pick a different color and keep it kind of looking the way it is to simplify.
Just to clarify the whole quote-unquote coat of paint, that's not to be taken literal. If we do have siding issues, we do need to probably, you know, replace the cladding and whatnot. That's what I really meant by that.
I understood what you meant, but it is good to clarify for anyone watching. The whole reason we're having this discussion is not really for cosmetic reasons, but that the building needs some work done on the siding, and so it's an opportunity to do it potentially in a different way right now. Okay, we are rather split. Couple people, I'm not sure where they stand. But we have agreed, I think we want the building to be welcoming. We wanted to fit in with the historic character of the neighborhood. We seem to like having some brick element on it. we want some sort of sliding French or accordion doors on the G Street side, and maybe would the council be supportive of just releasing it with that information and having somebody come back to us with a proposal? Rob?
I guess I'd like to take a vote on whether or not we're going to do the, essentially the glorified paint job, repairs and whatever in paint job, or if we would go with number 4, because it seems as though it's one of those two options seems to be in the lead here. So do we want to go with number 4, or do we want to go with essentially
Well, I
just a
asked
paint
who
job?
wanted number 4, and Valerie was the only one who raised her hand at the time, but since then you and Joel have spoken up.
And Rick
so-
also.
And
Rick
Rick.
also.
And Rick? Go ahead, Rick.
I like the concept in 4 in that it has a brick on it, but I still think some of the other features, I don't know if it's necessary to make those changes like on the frontage. So that's where I'm differing.
Yeah, I think it just sounds to me like we want kind of a hybrid of, something maybe similar to 4, but that we're open to having some changes on it as well. So at this point, I mean, somebody has to come up with a plan and do the work, so I don't know. Kurt?
Just for the record. Mama always told me, if you don't have anything nice to say. And I wish I could share the enthusiasm that you all have for spending money on this, but I don't. The only thing I've ever wanted out of the Welcome Center is to fix the bathrooms. So as long as we get that, I'm happy. You can do whatever else you want.
Okay. He's not a tiebreaker. All right. I don't know. We're at a standstill. So I think just from a point of view of like how this project gets done, Jason, what would be the recommended next step?
A great question. I think I have heard all the discussion. What I propose, we're going to move forward with getting 2 more renditions just for consideration that include everything I've heard in the discussion, because I feel like what I heard is essentially restore it exactly the way it is, maybe with some different colors. I think that's what I heard over here, but also that a lot of the elements in number 4 were desirable to council. And so we can revise that drawing. I heard leave the 4 pillars instead of switching them out, to try and maintain some of the look of the existing building. I think we could come back with all of those comments incorporated into maybe 1 or 2 drawings just for that's the one. And maybe also at that time, we'll try to revise the cost estimates, because maybe that will be also a help in deciding if one of them is another $100,000 over the other, council may choose to go a more inexpensive route. I'll try to turn that around very, very quickly, because we're with you. We want to get this project done as soon as possible, but I don't see that we're at a point where we can get to a good decision today. So let us get a couple more renditions back for you to consider. Maybe we even do it through a council memo as opposed to through another workshop, and you can just give your feedback to Aaron. I'm not sure how to keep it moving either, short of number 4 and the door on the south, and then we're off and running.
Yeah, I think there are some significant decisions we've made, but yeah, it's hard for people are all imagining different versions of, what they're thinking. So it would be good to have another picture for people to look at or choose from, a couple pictures to choose from maybe based on those ideas. But yeah, also be sure to get the, which I'm sure you have, but kind of landscaping and like morphing the back patio plaza area into that side, G Street side, seems to be significant. Okay. I think we got enough to move on for now, unless anybody has something burning. No, okay. Wayfinding signs.
Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully this one is a little easier. So this is to evaluate our wayfinding sign purpose and locations. As you know, we've been talking about this for quite a while. We did go out and fix quite a few of those for you, which was the parking, the free parking ones. And I think that those have been very successful. They are much more visible and really do guide folks into those parking lots. On September 28th, 2020, the most recent parking task force did give you that report. We have made almost all of the changes to the parking signs only. So as you recall, when we had that discussion, there are a lot of wayfinding signs out there. We replaced only the free parking signs and only the ones that had just parking on them, if that makes sense. So there's many signs out there that have parking and grasshopper lot or parking and growers market. We did not touch those signs because they had multiple messages on them. So this is a lot of review material. I'm going to kind of get through this because I know that you folks have been going for a long time. We did present those revised parking signs to you and replace a bunch of the parking signs. So at that time, we talked about the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the MUTCD, and that is the document that we go by that kind of sets the standards for signs on roadways. It was important to note that these are wayfinding signs. They are exempted from the standard, but you probably want to stick to a lot of their guidelines as a result, because what they say is that if a sign is on a street with a speed limit of X, the letters should be so tall so that you can see it far enough ahead to actually make a decision based on the information on that sign. They also talk about how far away you should put a wayfinding sign from its actual destination, especially in regards to parking, where they said it should be no more than 4 blocks away. If they get farther away from that, then people get confused because they've had to go past too many streets to get to those signs. So MUTCD did recommend for streets that are 25 miles an hour, and that's pretty much all of those downtown streets, that uppercase letters be at least 4 inches high and that lowercase letters be at least 3 inches high. This is again to make those signs readable at traffic speeds. The new parking signs that have been installed, the letters are 4 inches high and they are very much visible and you can read those very well. And they look just like that. So I did send this out to you. I hope that you were able to go out to the GIS story map. We do have I encourage you to go look at that. It has links to all of the signs that are out there and where they are located. It's actually pretty handy. There are about 49 or 50 wayfinding signs all over the city. Some of them in locations that, to be quite honest, don't make a lot of sense. And so we really would like to thin that number down so that they have more impact overall to guide them to the destinations that you feel are important destinations. Currently, they're pointing to things like parking, city parks, commercial enterprises, historic district, the downtown, growers market, and more. We have 2 blank sizes, and that's real important. That is a 22 by 36 and a 28 by 48. The 28 by 48 are limited for the bigger crosswalk signs, and they're mounted much higher. And so we don't want to get those too low because they'll take up too much space on the sign poles. But keeping in mind the MUTCD standards, though, and that 4-inch letter and 3-inch lowercase does greatly limit what we can put on our sign blanks, and that's something that we're going to want to consider. You can see the difference, and I know that this is really blank, and I hope it shows up better on your printing, but the free public parking in the tall letters shows up really clearly. When we look at the other one, which is it has 3 items on there: municipal district, which I'm actually not even sure what that one is, city hall, and courthouse. And those letters, I want to say, are about 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches high, and they really truly are unreadable. But if I take courthouse and I bunch that up to a 4-inch letter, I'm not going to fit courthouse on one line on that sign. And so it does really change what we're able to put onto those signs. This is kind of the telling piece. So the table at the left counts the number of times that text appears on a wayfinding sign. Now, I know that this number is much higher than 50, but multiple signs have multiple texts. So parking appears on 16 wayfinding signs. Historic district on 11 signs. Tessing Park only on 1. Pedestrian bridge on over 9. Breinhart Volunteer Park on 9. And you can see those counts from there. What we would ask that council consider is that we reduce the number of points that we are pointing people to so that we are able to pull down some of these signs. We'll reconfigure some of the others so that the text fits the signs, and we reduce the number of abbreviations, which can be confusing to people. And probably reduce the signs to no more than 2 points of interest. Some have as many as 3. 1 is likely going to be preferred just because of the new letter size. It's going to be difficult to fit multiple points of interest on a single sign unless it is the much larger blank, the 48-inch blank. So cost implications. This is not an inexpensive project. Currently, the new blanks are going to be between $245 and $275. We were able to restrip some of the old signs. The parking signs, the staff was able to take a heat gun and very carefully soften the letters and remove them. We were probably going to increase the cost of the blanks doing that, where it's easier to strip off the entire sign and put a whole new back on it. But it is an option. You know, we're looking at the total cost for about 30 signs. If we were to refurbish 30 total signs, it would be $12,000 to $15,000. Currently, there is no funding for this project identified. And with that, I would take your questions. I did give you guys another handout, which our GIS group put together. Our new GIS team, by the way, is awesome. I hope they're listening because they have been doing amazing work. Aaron came to us with a last-minute job this morning, and they were able to get that done twice, which was impressive. But they pulled this together, and this is a picture of every sign, every wayfinding sign and its location that's out there. So,
Questions, Rick?
Thank you, Jason. A couple of questions.
yeah.
Are we able to use tourism funds for this since it is tourism related?
I would like JC in here to answer that question for sure, but I personally would think that it is tourism or tourism-related facilities. You are guiding people to tourist destinations for the most part.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, you said staff is taking the sign and taking it apart and so forth by heat gun and so forth.
Yeah.
Is there a less expensive way of going to the sign people and just saying what we want done and give them the blank and have them modify it?
So, yes, we can get the blanks cheaper. We can letter the sign very effectively. It's removing the old letters from the sign that's very time consuming. And it's actually easier to send the blanks off, have the entire blank peeled and a new background layer applied. That's much cheaper than paying our staff to sit there with a heat gun and remove it one letter at a time.
Okay, so have we ever gotten a price from a commercial person to do it rather than staff?
Yeah. That's that in that 245 to 275. That's our new blank cost is in that. So that's for a brand new blank in that range.
With the
With
signage?
just the background, we would still apply the letters for the sign ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Vanessa?
Perhaps we could utilize melting cheese on the signs.
Utilize what?
Just kidding. There was
Oh.
a press release of a cheese that removed part of a stop sign, so perhaps we could just layer it with cheese and hope for the best. For the recommendation that we reduce the amount of wayfinding signs, was there a staff recommendation on the amount or on the amount of signs that should be?
There is not, and it may be that you want to coordinate with your tourism group on what it is that we truly want to advertise. The list here is pretty comprehensive. of what it is that the wayfinding signs are pointing folks to. You know, we would want to drop the number of signs down maybe into the 30s. Right now, 50 is a very large number. And when you do go to that story map and you look at where they're at, there's very large cluster downtown, just a couple up north, couple south of the river, and then also way out towards Lincoln Road as you're getting out there towards Reinhardt Park. So you could consider definitely those ones on the fringes, you know, reducing those back to the core, but yet still maybe have a few on the extreme ends to get people into the historic district in the downtown.
Other questions? Rob?
So, I guess there was really, it doesn't seem, first I just have to comment, Jason, the first time I saw one of your new free public parking signs, I was unbelievably psyched. It was really, really good. It was like, man, at a glance, at speed, it's like, look at that, an actual wayfinding sign that works in Grants Pass. It was awesome. It was on 6th Street, I think just before G in the left-hand lane.
Great.
So it does the job. I've been on this since 2014 in one form or another, so it was awesome to see a sign that worked. But, so there's, on that list of the number of types of signs,
Yeah.
it says visitor information, about 4th or 5th from the bottom.
Yep.
Is that the one that's up on 7th near Hillside that kind of duplicates the Chamber of Commerce sign?
I think it is actually.
So it basically just duplicates, so there's duplication, I think it's even on the same pole,
It's
right?
very possible.
Yeah, so there's a few of them that, and I think there's one out on Lincoln Road, when you're going northbound on Lincoln Road, I think that says Historic District, but then doesn't have a sign when you get to G Street.
Yeah.
So there's some signs that make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
Then there's some on 7th, as you're coming up 7th, where they're clustered, not just in the same, 2-block area, they're clustered in the same 20 feet.
Yeah.
Right, so some of them are just like absolute no-brainers to remove because they're either wrong or they're clustered like within arm's distance of another. And I don't know what the number of that is. That's probably only 6 or 8, but those in a cluster, I don't look at the downtown as a cluster, but those super clustered. So do you have any idea, like the number of, we'll say super low hanging fruit like that are either wrong or like, we'll call it a super cluster?
I'll bet
I
if
just mentioned
staff
3 or
and I
4,
were,
but-
if staff and I were to put our heads together, I'll bet we could remove 10 of them pretty easily. Where they give you either half directions, as you were talking about,
Right.
where they say, ooh, historic district this way, but you get to a major intersection
Right.
and there's not really another direction. There's also a couple that are pointing to like the high school, where most tourists aren't actually looking to get to the high school. Those kind of signs could probably be eliminated. Same thing with like City Hall, the courthouse, those type of signs. We could easily do that. And then look at restructuring the text on the others to make them more effective and readable.
So isn't it more, I guess, consistent or accurate that signs that say historic district are typically brown?
They are informational signs, traditionally are. You know, the wayfinding is really for those tourists. It's really to get people to your downtown. And then I guess the intent is to follow the city's branding and to keep them consistent. But yes, they are. Historic district signs are usually brown.
Because I think we even have some of those, in town.
Yeah,
It almost seemed to me to be consistent to have all of the historic signs brown because that is the norm, I guess, statewide or maybe even nationally. I don't
Yeah.
know. You might want to, I don't know, you could look into
Yeah,
that. That's what I
if
think.
that's council's direction, we would be glad to change them out with a standardized sign that we can purchase out of a catalog for a much lower dollar value.
Other questions? Aaron, hi.
I just want to make one comment. If council is comfortable, staff can move forward with a reduction in these wayfinding signs based on what we feel is appropriate. And like Councilor Pell said, there are some that are just, you look at it and you're like, okay, that's an easy one to determine. And go ahead and make a pretty good reduction and a visual impact, I think, of the signs, if council wants to do that. If they feel comfortable, with that, we can just move forward if you just say, yes, please do it. Or if you want us to do that, but first give you a memo on what action we're going to take and then let you know, hey, this is how we're moving forward, that's fine too. Or if you'd like to go through and look at these in more detail based on what the wayfinding is pointing towards and location, we can do that. So those are sort of three options that we can provide for you based on your comfort level.
Anybody have suggestions of how they want this to go? Are you comfortable with trimming down? Go ahead, DJ.
Yeah, I don't want to micromanage this process. I want to follow the recommendations of the Downtown Parking Task Force. Use your judgment, make them bigger, use the standards, 4-inch lettering, big arrow. You know, they don't work now. It's a very simple process to redo these signs. And I don't want to look at every sign. I don't want to redesign the signs. I just want them to work. I want to be able to read them from a block away. It's very simple recommendation for me. I would like you guys to redo these signs per those recommendations with large lettering and move on.
I'm seeing people say yes and agree with that.
Yeah.
Do you have something else, Rob?
Yeah, I would agree with that, especially since you're using the appropriate codes, which were never obviously addressed or consulted with before. At least we know they're going to be visible at driving speeds. You know, at roughly 44 feet per second coming up 7th Street, you need a little bit of time. So the fact that you're using the actual codes, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm just a little concerned that if you remove any signs that say visitor center, that you have in mind what we're going to replace it with or where. Because that was one of the biggest considerations that DMO group came in and said that our current visitor center not only have very poor signage on the visitor center itself, but and I believe James Lowe said similar things, but James Love. So if you're going to remove any that say visitor center, have some plan in mind as to what you're going to replace it with or why you're doing it, yeah.
Understood, thank you.
Valerie says she's comfortable with letting staff work on it. Sounds like everybody is. Let's start with removing municipal district because nobody knows what that is, so. All right, agenda review. We have a meeting coming up this Wednesday. Public hearing on annexing RCC, a resolution to consider a affordable housing grant SDC waiver, a resolution to approve membrane procurement phase 1 for the water treatment plant, resolution that would authorize a grant agreement between with the Jackson and Josephine County Housing Councils, a resolution that is an option agreement and memorandum of understanding for Meadowood Reservoir, a resolution awarding the Caveman Pool design and architect, a resolution for the State Fire Marshal's Engine Program Grant, a resolution for the Oregon State Parks Land Water Conservation Fund, a resolution for the Schroeder Lane Stormwater Project, a resolution revising the comprehensive fee schedule, a resolution for the SEAT membership change, a resolution for FirstNet AT&T mobility agreement, and a resolution for Sobering Center funding, and appointing a member to the Housing Advisory Task Force. And then next Monday, actually, we have canceled, I guess, every other workshop for the remainder of the year. So y'all will have to fight if you don't agree with that. But Joel and I met with the city manager last week, and so we decided to try this out experimentally. So we've already been, kind of eliminating one per month, and this eliminates 2. So no workshop next Monday. Then the 31st, 2 weeks from today, we would have a workshop covering training for how to do the city manager evaluation process, as well as a discussion on 360 review, a potential new way of evaluating the city manager. And that's all we have on that date for now. So that gets us through the month. Questions, comments? Rob?
Can I comment on next month or no?
Sure.
So on November 14th, we've got Measure 109, time, place, and manner discussion. And So I know that Dr. Megan Frost and Steve Elfrink probably have a lot to offer as far as, that discussion, but I know that Dr. Frost wanted to have some idea if we were going to potentially allow her to speak on it, because I've spoken with her. She seems very, very qualified on that subject. And anyway, the point is that if we could move that to the top of that, because she wanted to know how much of her schedule she would have to clear that day. And I told her that maybe we could put her at the top of the agenda so that she would know exactly a definitive start time.
Okay, I guess I wasn't aware of having guests, but yeah, we can switch those two items if that's what you're asking.
And I guess I'm also asking, do we want to have a qualified or two qualified guests there that basically know more about the subject than anybody on the council? But like I say, she's, a lot of people probably know her. She's a Dr. Asante, and also Steve Elfrink, I guess, is on track to be one of the facilitators at the service centers. And if we're going to be talking about time, place, and manner, I know that I know a fair amount about that subject, but after speaking with them, they did bring up some things that I had not considered. So I think it'd be valuable to have them there.
Okay, so I guess we're also asking just whether council wants to have some guests at that meeting. Okay. Yes, Vanessa? Are you just saying yes? Did you have comment? No? Okay.
So for the reasonable time, place, and manner regulations, because council had given direction for staff not to draft an opt-out to refer to the voters, we're automatically going to be opted into the program starting the 1st of January. So the time, place, and manner regulations are really only surrounding basically the hours of operation, where psilocybin service centers can be placed in the city, same with manufacturing. It's not really putting any sort of limitations other than like buffer zones and things like that. These are going to be mainly development code updates with some minor municipal code updates that are also going to mirror the rules that are slated to come out at the end of the year. So we have interim rules, but the municipal code amendments were going to be such that it largely mirrors state law. So because it's not going to be a change in, it's not going to be disallowing, it's going to be allowing for the use. So
I think that was understood. Are the comments that they made to you, Rob, are they related to time, place, and manner?
Absolutely.
The location?
No doubt, especially hours of operation and things of that nature that I really hadn't considered.
Okay. So,
I mean, it's completely at your discretion. In my preliminary draft of the rules, I've really been using the statute, the measure itself, and the administrative rules that have been put out so far by the OHA as kind of the guide stones. I haven't really deviated too far from those rules or statutes.
okay. Well, I saw that several council members were interested in having some people who might be considered experts consulted. So if you could get your names to Augustus or Aaron of people you want to suggest for that, we have a little ways before we get to that meeting. But
it might be helpful to them if I send what I will have up to that point for their opinion. That definitely would be helpful for me.
I would think so, yeah. Okay. Anything else on that topic? Okay. Anything else in general, DJ?
Sure. Recently, we've been talking about downtown plans, welcome centers, et cetera, and it comes up to utilize urban renewal dollars. We did have meetings that talked about urban renewal dollars and the implication of utilizing those. I think it's appropriate to have a workshop on that to present current state of urban renewal dollars and those implications. I've considered if a memo would suffice. I don't think a memo would suffice at this point, as I can imagine there would be a lot of questions and discussions that would come out of that presentation.
Okay, so a look at where we are at with urban renewal funds in general, not specific to downtown.
Yeah. I'm not talking about specifics. I would imagine maybe downtown could be used as an example, but yes, I'm asking for a more generalized discussion.
Okay, And is that something that the council's interested in? Maybe need to explain it more. They have questions. Vanessa, go ahead.
Is that in relation to that recent graph that was dispersed? Okay. Yeah, I think that's a discussion worth having.
Okay, Valerie's also saying yes. Okay, anything else? Something on the table today? What are you holding up? What do you, go ahead.
Petition that was submitted. I mean, I think it's a reasonable request. Have you looked at it, Augustus?
Not at this point, no.
It's the neighborhood requesting us to change the parking times on East Park.
Okay, what are you asking that we do with it? I guess most people haven't read the,
So I've had a conversation with them and you may recall also, they sent you an email, and one of my responses was in my email, they suggested having either neighborhood parking only or certain designated hours of parking on East Park Street. And that is something that ultimately is council purview, not staff purview. And if they wanted to have that change, then they would need to make that request to council. This is the follow-up to my email response to them that you were CC'd on. They're now making a request for council to consider changes in parking usage on East Park Street. And you may recall also one of the other issues is that we're going to be doing a speed study on East Park Street also.
do you know when that's happening?
So the contractor for the speed study is out on vacation until the end of the month. So it'll be sometime 1st of November that we're going to be doing a speed study for East Park Street.
Okay, Brian?
Just to clarify, when we're talking about East Park Street, we're talking about directly adjacent to Riverside Park?
Well, the individuals that made this request live in that specific area, but ultimately the amount and area of parking that you'd want to consider is up to you to determine.
Right, but that's what the request is for
There was,
Park Street right next to Riverside Park. That's the request.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Kurt, so are you asking to have a workshop on this, or?
Well, I think we should discuss it. It seems like a pretty reasonable request, and that's why I wanted to see if Augustus had looked at it, if there's any reason or
Okay,
perhaps.
Just in my quick scan of this is probably something that I'd want to take to outside counsel, just to give them a heads up and get their opinion on it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to write it down to follow up. Joel and I will follow up with Aaron at our meeting next week, I guess it would be. East Park Street parking.
So one other thing you might want to, when you're thinking about it, I'm just, because I can't picture it, this is maybe 10 names, and I'm just wondering, are there residents that park there, residents who live, you know, that they pay properties that they pay property tax on? Would they be prohibited also? So it's just something else to consider when we're discussing this. Does it affect a lot of residents as well?
Okay. Yeah.
As well, Augustus, when you do take this to outside counsel, will you please share that there is precedent on this? Council has also done this on Tussing as well.
And I believe with the big trucks, did it up on Washington, right? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yep, Valerie's asking, the work plan, third quarter, third plan, oh, it's on there. It's November 14th, Valerie. She just doesn't have a copy of this in front of her. Okay. Brian,
Can I move that we go into executive session?
you may. Second from.
Then I do.
Okay, second from DJ. All in favor of adjourning into executive session?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, in that case, the council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of discussing those